What's up, it's your boy George W. Bush, America's smartest president, on why America needs to get rid of its two-party system. So first of all, a multi-party system isn't bad because it works great, because it doesn't. I think it just works better than a two-party system. Second of all, I'm also well aware that American political parties are way more loose and have way more internal factions than political parties in other countries. With political party, I mean political parties like the Republican and Democrats, not the thing politicians do in the basement of a pizza restaurant. For the people who don't know, American political parties have tons of inter-party rivalries. Democrats constantly attack other Democrats and Republicans constantly attack other Republicans. Like Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to oust Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson and getting booed by both parties.
This is the uniparty for the American people watching.
In other places in the world, like Europe, this would be completely unthinkable. In Europe, party members always back each other up, and when they don't, this is big news. Now, let me be clear, I am not saying that Ms. Greene here is doing a bad thing, because American parties shouldn't work like European parties, because the situation in America, which has the two-party system, is very different than in Europe, where countries have a multi-party system. In the United States, there can only reasonably be two parties. Because of this, different factions of political thought, which in a multi-party system would just have been separate parties, have to make an alliance and become one of two parties. An example of this is that a large part of the black community normally votes Democrat, whilst the black community also is way less accepting of gay marriage, a cause the Democratic Party fully supports. This example shows that the black community as a political faction has allied themselves into the Democratic Party, which overwhelmingly supports same-sex marriage, even though the black community does not. In a multi-party system, the black community would just be represented by a completely separate party. The same goes for the Republican Party, where different groups are in one party. I mean, we all know that if Madison Cawthorn could form his own party, he would make the "we love wearing women's lingerie but hate gays" party. But here lies the first problem. Most people and most Americans don't view American political parties like this. They view these parties as cohesive wholes, and because the media only looks at the most extreme of the extreme factions in these parties, and because unlike Europe these extremes are allowed to run wild, it feels for the average American as if the extremes are the real parties, which of course isn't true. This is how you come to a situation where a lot of Republicans think Democrats want to turn all their kids trans, and Democrats think all Republicans want to kill everyone in the LGBTQ2+ community. This makes the entirety of politics just way more volatile, which makes both sides become more extreme because they feel constantly attacked. Because that is what happens when you let the extremists dictate the conversation. And the media reinforces this because drama gets clicks. All this attacking the other side is way easier if you have easily defined your and the other side, even if those definitions of the two sides aren't accurate and only represent their extremes. In a multi-party system this is way more difficult because nobody is bunched in with the extremes, or anyone else they don't really agree with for that matter. So a normal person can just stick with a party that represents them the best without having to defend some other political views they don't agree with. This is all because a multi-party system allows for party lines to be way more clearly defined. Which brings me to the second problem. The American political sides aren't clearly defined and nobody knows what to expect. How does the average American know what they are voting for if the system mostly puts forward the most extreme views of both political parties? Again, this is partly because of the media, both mainstream, alternative and social, but also because it is very difficult to gauge which of the inner party factions are at the forefront and what those factions even are. Geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan says the Democrats used to be made up by liberal coastal highly educated elites, union members and minorities, whilst Republicans were made up by pro-business voters, religious conservatives, military voters and the strong law and order types. But how does he then explain Bill Clinton, who was very pro-military and pro-business? This is why I don't agree with Zeihan completely. I know there are definitely factions and this broadly describes them, but it just isn't that simple as this are the factions within each party and this is what they stand for all the time. What I'm trying to show with this example is that precisely figuring out what either the Democrat or Republican Party stands for the average person and even the reasonably politically engaged person is very difficult. What I do agree with Zeihan on is that Trump changed the way the Republican Party was made up so that whatever the old factions were, they now don't make sense anymore. normal. No matter how you look at it, the Republican Party after Trump is wildly different than the Republican Party before Trump. I mean, would you have imagined Amber Rose speaking at the Republican National Convention under Bush or Romney? I honestly think Romney would just get a panic attack and then fall over looking at her, because I'm pretty sure Joseph Smith didn't really like face tattoos. I'm not saying that this change is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that there has been a massive change, which means that the Democrats are now playing catch up. This kind of thing happens quite a lot in American history. Franklin D. Roosevelt, for instance, changed the Democratic Party from a party that supported racist pro-white policies and Jeffersonian-style agrarian society policies to a party which supported welfare for the less fortunate, equal rights for minorities like blacks, Jews and Catholics, and black industrial blue-collar workers. The Republican Party at this time just kind of had to keep up with the changes the Democrats were making. Trump right now is doing the same thing to the Republican Party, although in a very different way than Roosevelt. But still, just like Roosevelt changed the Democrats dramatically, Trump is changing the Republicans very dramatically. It isn't very clear though into what Trump will change the Republican Party, let alone what the Democratic Party will turn into. This is normal. When Franklin D. Roosevelt was changing the Democrats, it wasn't clear to most people at the time what they would exactly turn into either. It actually took until the late 40s for this all to get somewhat settled. The fun thing is that when Roosevelt was changing the Democratic Party, the Republicans just basically became the anti-Roosevelt party, just like Democrats right now are just the anti-Trump party. But that, again, is kind of the problem. It is kind of weird to have a party just change without anyone really knowing what it will turn into. It means that nobody really knows what the political forces at play are right now in the United States. In a multi-party system, this is always very clear, because parties just rise and fall, which makes it very clear what the political forces of that moment are, but for the American voters, this is not the case. This is why the American two-party system sucks. It is very difficult for the average American to figure out what their party actually stands for. You might say, but what about policy proposals? Can't the average American just look at the policies both sides want to implement and figure out what the party stands for that way? But first of all, in what kind of a world has the average American the time to really look at all the policy proposals of both parties and really figure out how they will impact the United States of America? And second of all, even then, how does the average American figure out which policy each party prioritizes? Because how does the average American know which faction in each party holds more sway? Because if the average American can't know which faction holds more sway, it will not be able to know which policies each party will prioritize. And then there's still a lot of stuff that isn't even written in policy papers. You think Nancy Pelosi made it a policy that she is the best stock trader in the world? Of course not. That's just an added benefit. Basically, the American two-party system creates confusion because it's unclear what people are voting for, which then lends itself to being exploited by both mainstream, alternative and in general social media to push more and more polarizing and antagonizing views. All of this gets thrown on top of a system where nobody really knows what the political parties represent. Basically, my questions to Americans who like the two-party system is, how can you expect to have a democracy when the average voter doesn't know what the party they are voting for actually stands for and think of the opposition as the actual devil? So, this was your boy George W. Bush on why America needs to get rid of its two-party system. I hope you enjoyed the video. I would love to see your comments with your own thoughts below this video. See you later.